From Book 2 of Prophecies and Revelations by Saint Bridget of Sweden. Christ's words to the bride, giving an explanation of the immediately preceding chapter, and about the devil's attack on the aforementioned night, and about his terrible and just condemnation. Chapter 9. The entire span of this life is but as a single hour for me. Therefore, what I am telling you now has always been in my foreknowledge. I told you before about a man who began the true knighthood, and about another who deserted it like a scoundrel. The man who deserted from the ranks of true knights threw down his shield at my feet and his sword at my side, by breaking his sacred promises and vows. The shield he threw down symbolizes nothing other than the upright faith by which he was to defend himself against the enemies of the faith and of his soul. The feet on which I walk toward humanity symbolize nothing other than the divine delight by which I attract a person to myself, and the patience by which I patiently bear with him. He threw the shield down when he entered my sanctuary, thinking to himself, I want to obey the Lord who counseled me not to practice abstinence, the one who gives me what I desire and lets me hear things pleasant to my ears. This was how he threw down the shield of my faith, by wanting to follow his own selfish desire rather than me, by loving the creature more than the Creator. If he had an upright faith, if he had believed me to be almighty and a just judge, and the giver of eternal glory, he would not have wished for anything but me. He would not have feared anything but me. But he threw down my faith at my feet, despising it and counting it for nothing, because he did not seek to please me and had no regard for my patience. Then he threw down his sword at my side. The sword denotes nothing other than the fear of God, which God's true knight should continuously have in his hands, that is, in his axe. My side symbolizes nothing other than the care and protection with which I shelter and defend my children, like a mother hen sheltering her chicks, so that the devil does not harm them, and no unendurable trials come upon them. But that man threw away the sword of my fear by not bothering to think about my power, and by not having any regard for my love and patience. He threw it down at my side, as if to say, I neither fear nor care about your defense. I got what I have by my own doing, and my noble birth. He broke the promise he made to me. What is the true promise that a man is bound to vow to God? Surely it is deeds of love. That whatever a person does, he should do out of love for God. But this he set aside by twisting his love for God toward self-love. He preferred his selfishness to future and eternal delight. In this way he separated himself from me, and left the sanctuary of my humility. The body of any Christian ruled by humility is my sanctuary. Those ruled by pride are not my sanctuary, but the sanctuary of the devil, who steers them toward worldly desire after his own purposes. Having gone out of the temple of my humility, and having rejected the shield of holy faith and the sword of fear, he walked out proudly to the fields, cultivating every selfish lust and desire, scorning to fear me, and growing in sin and lust. When he reached the final end of his life and his soul had left the body, the demons charged out to meet him. 3 voices from hell could be heard speaking against him. The first said, Is not this the man who deserted from humility and followed us in pride? If his 2 feet could take him up even higher in pride, so as to surpass us and hold the primacy in pride, he would be quick to do so. The soul answered him, I am the one. Justice answered him, This is the reward of your pride. You will descend handed by one demon down to the next until you reach the lowest part of hell. And given that there was no demon who did not know his own particular punishment, and the torment to be inflicted for every useless thought and deed, neither will you escape punishment at the hands of any one of them, but share in the malice and evil of them all. The second voice cried out, saying, Is not this the man who separated himself from his promised service to God, and joined our ranks instead? The soul answered, I am the one. And Justice said, This is your allotted reward, that everyone who imitates your conduct as a knight will add to your punishment and sorrow by his own corruption and pain, and will strike you at his coming as though with a deadly wound. You will be like a man afflicted by a severe wound, indeed like one afflicted by wound upon wound, until his whole body is full of wounds, who endures intolerable suffering and bewails his fate constantly. Even so, you will experience misery upon misery. At the height of your pain will be renewed, and your punishment will never end, and your woes will never decrease. The third voice cried out, Is not this the man who exchanged his Creator for creatures, the love of his Creator for his own selfishness? Justice answered, It certainly is. Therefore, 2 holes will be opened in him. Through the first will enter into him every punishment earned for his least sin, up to his greatest, inasmuch as he exchanged his Creator for his own lust. Through the second there will enter into him every kind of pain and shame, and no divine consolation or charity will ever come to him, inasmuch as he loved himself rather than his Creator. His life will last forever, and his punishment will last forever, for all the saints have turned away from him. My bride, see how miserable those people will be who despise me, and how great will be the pain they purchase at the price of so little pleasure. As God spoke to Moses from the burning bush, Christ speaks to the bride about how the devil is symbolized by Pharaoh, present-day knights by the people of Israel, and the virgin's body by the bush, and about how present-day knights and bishops are, at the present, preparing a home for the devil. Chapter 10. It is written in the law of Moses that Moses was watching over the flocks in the desert when he saw a bush that was on fire without being burned up, and he became afraid and covered his face. A voice spoke to him from the bush. I have heard of my people suffering, and feel pity for them, for they are oppressed in harsh slavery. I, who am now speaking with you, am that voice heard from the bush. I have heard the misery of my people. Who were my people, if not Israel? Using this same name, I now designate the knights in the world who have taken the vows of my knighthood, and who should be mine, but are being attacked by the devil. What did Pharaoh do to my people Israel in Egypt? 3 things. First, when they were building his walls, they were not to be helped by those gatherers of straw who earlier had helped them in making bricks. Instead, They had to go themselves and gather the straw wherever they could throughout the entire country. Second, the builders did not get any thanks for their labor, despite their producing the number of bricks set them as a goal. Third, the foreman beat them harshly whenever they fell short of their normal production. In the midst of their great affliction, this people of mine built 2 cities for Pharaoh. This Pharaoh is none other than the devil, who attacks my people, that is, the knights, who ought to be my people. Truly I tell you that if the knights had kept the arrangement and rule established by my first friend, they would have been among my dearest friends, just as Abraham, who was the first to be given the commandment of circumcision, and was obedient to me, became my dearest friend, and anyone who imitated Abraham's faith and works shared in his love and glory. So too the knights were especially pleasing to me, among all the others, since they promised to shed for me that which they held most dear, their own blood. By this vow they made themselves most pleasing to me, just as Abraham did in the matter of circumcision, and they purified themselves daily by living up to their profession and by taking up the practice of holy charity. These knights are now so oppressed by their wretched slavery under the devil that the devil is wounding them with a lethal wound and throwing them into pain and suffering. The bishops of the church are building 2 cities for him, just like the children of Israel. The first city stands for physical toil and meaningless anxiety over the acquisition of worldly goods. The second city stands for spiritual unrest and distress, inasmuch as they are never allowed to rest from worldly desire. There is toil on the outside and restlessness and anxiety on the inside, rendering spiritual things a burden. Just as Pharaoh did not supply my people with the things necessary for making bricks, or give them fields full of grain, or wine and other useful things, but the people had to go and find for themselves in sorrow and tribulation of heart. So the devil deals likewise with them now. Although they toil for and covet the world with their inmost heart, they are still unable to fulfill their desire and sate the thirst of their greed. They are consumed on the inside with sorrow and on the outside with toil. For that reason, I pity them their sufferings, because my knights, my people, are building homes for the devil and toiling ceaselessly, because they cannot get what they desire, and because they worry themselves over meaningless goods, although the fruit of their anxiety is not a blessing, but rather the reward of shame. When Moses was sent to the people, God gave him a miraculous sign for 3 reasons. First, it was because each person in Egypt worshipped his own individual god, and because there were innumerable beings who were said to be gods. Therefore, it was fitting that there should be a miraculous sign so that, through it and by the power of God, people would believe that there was one God and one Creator of all things, because of the signs, and so that all the idols would be proved worthless. Second, a sign was also given to Moses as a symbol prefiguring my future body. What did the burning bush that was not consumed symbolize, if not the Virgin who conceived by the Holy Spirit and gave birth without corruption? From this bush I came forth, assuming a human nature from the virginal body of Mary. Similarly, the serpent given as a sign to Moses symbolizes my body. In the third place, a sign was given to Moses in order to confirm the truth of coming events and to prefigure the miraculous signs to be done in the future, proving the truth of God to be so much the truer and more certain, the more clearly those things signified by the signs were in time fulfilled. I am now sending my words to the children of Israel, that is, to the knights. They need no miraculous signs for 3 reasons. This is, first of all, because the one God and Creator of all things is already worshipped and known through the Holy Scripture, as well as through many signs. Second, they are not now waiting for me to be born, because they know that I was truly born, and became incarnate without corruption, inasmuch as Scripture has been completely fulfilled. And there is no better or more certain faith to be held and believed than the one that has already been preached by me and by my holy preachers. Nevertheless, I have done 3 things through you, by which it may be believed. First, these are my true words, and do not differ from the true faith. Second, a demon went out of a possessed man at my word. Third, I gave a certain man the power to unite mistrustful hearts in mutual charity. Therefore, do not have any doubts about those who will believe in me. Those who believe in me believe also in my words. Those who savor me savor also my words. It is written that Moses covered his face after speaking with God. You, however, do not need to cover your face. I opened your spiritual eyes so that you might see spiritual things. I opened your ears so that you might hear the things that are of the Spirit. I will show you a likeness of my body, as it was during and before my passion, and such as it was after the resurrection, as Magdalene and Peter and others saw it. You will also hear my voice as it spoke to Moses from within the bush. This same voice is now speaking within your soul. From Prophecies and Revelations by Saint Bridget of Sweden. Book 2. The Son's Instruction to the Bride about the Devil. The Son's answer to the bride about why he does not remove evildoers before they fall into sin, and about how the kingdom of heaven is given to baptized persons who die before reaching the age of discretion. Chapter 1. The Son spoke to the bride, saying, When the devil tempts you, tell him these 3 things. The words of God cannot be anything but true. Second, nothing is impossible for God, because he can do all things. Third, you, devil, could not give me so great a fervor of love as that which God gives me. Again the Lord spoke to the bride, saying, I look at people in 3 ways. First, their outer body and what condition it is in. Second, their inner conscience, what it tends toward and in what way. Third, their heart and what it desires. Like a bird that sees a fish in the sea and assesses the depth of the water, and also takes note of the storm winds, I too know and assess the ways of each person, and take note of what is due for each. For I am keener of sight and can assess the human situation better than a person knows his own self. Therefore, because I see and know all things, you might ask me why I do not take evildoers away before they fall into the depths of sin. I myself asked the question, and I myself will answer it for you. I am the Creator of all things, and all things are foreknown to me. I know and see all that has been, and all that will be. But Although I know and can do all things, still, for reasons of justice, I no more interfere with the natural constitution of the body than I do with the inclination of the soul. Each human being continues in existence according to the natural constitution of the body, such as it is and was from all eternity in my foreknowledge. The fact that one person has a longer life and another a shorter has to do with natural strength or weaknesses, and is related to a person's physical constitution. It is not due to my foreknowledge that one person loses his sight or another becomes lame, or something like that, since my foreknowledge of all things is such that no one is the worse for it, nor is it harmful to anyone. Moreover, these things do not occur because of the course and position of the heavenly elements, but due to some hidden principle of justice in the constitution and conservation of nature. For sin and natural disorder bring about the deformity of the body in many ways. This does not happen because I will it directly, but because I permit it to happen for the sake of justice. Even though I can do all things, still I do not obstruct justice. Accordingly, the length of brevity of a person's life is related to the weakness or strength of his physical constitution, such as it was in my foreknowledge that no one can contravene. You can understand this by way of a simile. Imagine that there were two roads with one road leading up to them. There were a great many graves in both roads, crossing and overlapping one another. The end of one of the two roads dropped directly downward. The end of the other tended upward. At the crossroads was written, "Whoever travels this road begins it in physical pleasure and delight, and ends it in great wretchedness and shame. Whoever takes the other road begins it in moderate and endurable exertion, but reaches the end in great joy and consolation." A person walking along on the single road was completely blind. However, when he reached the crossroads, his eyes were opened, and he saw what was written about how the two roads ended. While he was studying the sign and thinking it over to himself, there suddenly appeared next to him two men who were entrusted with guarding the two roads. As they observed the wayfarer at the crossroads, they said to each other, "Let us carefully observe which road he chooses to take, and then he will belong to that one of us whose road he selects." The wayfarer, however, was considering to himself the ends and advantages of each road. He made the prudent decision of selecting the road whose beginning involved some pain, but had joy at the end, rather than the road that began in joy but ended in pain. He decided that it was more sensible and endurable to get tired from a little exertion at the start, but rest in safety at the end. Do you understand what all this means? I shall tell you. These two roads are the good and the evil within human reach. It lies within a person's power and free will to choose whatever he or she likes upon reaching the age of discretion. A single road leads up to the two roads of the choice between good and evil. In other words, the time of childhood leads up to the age of discretion. The man walking on the first road is like a blind man, because he is, as it were, blind from his childhood up until he reaches the age of discretion, not knowing how to distinguish between good and evil, between sin and virtue, between what is commanded and what is forbidden. The man walking on this first road, that is, in the age of boyhood, is like a blind man. However, when he reaches the crossroads, that is, the age of discretion, the eyes of his understanding are opened. He then knows how to decide whether it is better to experience a little pain but eternal joy, or a little joy and eternal pain. Whichever road he chooses, he will not lack those who carefully count his steps. There are many graves on these roads, one after the other, one over against the other, because both in youth and in old age, one person may die earlier, another later, one in youth, another in old age. The end of this life is fittingly symbolized by graves. It will come to everyone, one in this way, another in that, according to each one's natural constitution and exactly as I have foreknown it. If I took anyone away against the body's natural constitution, the devil would have grounds of accusation against me. Accordingly, in order that the devil might not find anything in me that goes against justice in the least, I no more interfere with the natural constitution of the body than I do with the constitution of the soul. But consider my goodness and mercy. For, as the teacher says, I give virtue to those who do not have any virtue. By reason of my great love, I give the kingdom of heaven to all of the baptized who die before reaching the age of discretion. As it is written, it has pleased my Father to give the kingdom of heaven to such as these. By reason of my tender love, I even show mercy to the infants of pagans. If any of them die before reaching the age of discretion, given that they cannot come to know me face to face, they go instead to a place that is not permitted for you to know, but where they will live without suffering. Those who have advanced from the one road reach those two roads, that is, the age of discretion, between good and evil. It is then in their power to choose what pleases them most. Their reward will follow the inclination of their will, since by that time they know how to read the sign written at the crossroads telling them that it is better to experience a little pain at the start and joy ready and waiting for them than experience joy at the start and pain at the end. Sometimes it does not happen that people are taken away earlier than their natural physical constitution would normally allow. For example, through homicide, drunkenness, and things of that kind. This is because the devil's wickedness is such that the sinner, in this case, would receive an extremely long-lasting punishment if he were to continue in the world for any great length of time. Therefore, some people are taken away earlier than their natural physical condition would allow, due to the demands of justice and because of their sins. Their removal has been foreknown to me from all eternity, and it is impossible for anyone to contravene my foreknowledge. Sometimes good people are also taken away earlier than their natural physical constitution would allow. Because of the great love I have toward them, and because of their burning love and their efforts to discipline the body for my sake, justice sometimes requires that they be taken away, as foreknown to me from all eternity. Thus, I no more interfere with the natural constitution of the body than I do with the constitution of the soul. The son's indictment of a certain soul who was to be condemned in the presence of the bride, and Christ's answer to the devil about why he permitted this soul, and permits other evildoers, to touch and take or receive his own true body. Chapter 2. God appeared angry and said, "This work of my hands, whom I destined for great glory, holds me in much contempt. This soul, to whom I offered all my loving care, did three things to me. He averted his eyes from me, and turned them toward the enemy. He fixed his will on the world. He put his confidence in himself, because he was free to sin against me. For this reason, because he did not bother to have any regard for me, I brought my sudden justice upon him. Because he had fixed his will against me, and put false confidence in himself, I took away from him the object of his desire. Then a devil cried out, saying, 'Judge, this soul is mine.' The judge answered, 'What grounds do you bring against him?' He answered, My accusation is the statement in your own indictment that he despised you, his creator, and because of that his soul has become my handmaid. Besides, since he was suddenly taken away, how could he suddenly begin to please you? For, when he was of sound body and living in the world, he did not serve you with a sincere heart, since he loved created things more fervently, nor did he bear illness patiently, or reflect on your works as he ought to have. In the end, he was not burning with the fire of charity. He is mine because you have taken him away suddenly. The judge answered, A sudden end does not condemn a soul, unless there is an inconsistency in her actions. A person's will is not condemned forever without careful deliberation. Then the Mother of God came and said, My son, if a lazy servant has a friend who is on intimate terms with his master, should not his intimate friend come to his aid? Should he not be saved if he asks for it, for the sake of the other? The judge answered, Every act of justice should be accompanied by mercy and wisdom. Mercy with respect to remitting severity, wisdom to ensure that equity is maintained. But if the transgression is of such a kind as not to deserve remission, the sentence can still be mitigated for the sake of friendship without infringing justice. Then his mother said, My blessed son, this soul had me constantly in mind, and showed me reverence, and was often moved to celebrate the great solemnity for my sake, even though he was cold towards you. So have mercy on him. The son answered, Blessed mother, you know and see all things in me. Even though this soul kept you in mind, he did so more for the sake of his temporal welfare than for his spiritual welfare. He did not treat my most pure body as he should have. His foul mouth kept him from enjoying my charity. Worldly love and dissolution hid my suffering from him. His taking my pardon too much for granted and not thinking about his end accelerated his death. Although he received me continuously, it did not improve him much, because he did not prepare himself properly. A person who wishes to receive his noble lord and guest should not only get the guest room ready, but also all the utensils. This man did not do so, since, although he cleaned the house, he did not sweep it reverently with care. He did not strew the floor with the flowers of his virtues, or fill the utensils of his limbs with abstinence. Therefore, you see well enough that what must be done to him is what he deserves. Although I may be invulnerable and beyond comprehension, and am everywhere by reason of my divinity, my delight is in the pure, even if I enter the good and the damned alike. The good receive my body, which was crucified and ascended into heaven, which was prefigured by the manna and by the widow's flour. The wicked do so likewise, but, whereas for the good it leads to greater strength and consolation, for the wicked it leads to an even more just condemnation, inasmuch as they, in their unworthiness, are not afraid to approach so worthy a sacrament. The devil answered, If he approached you unworthily, and his sentence was made stricter because of this, why did you permit him to approach you and touch you despite his unworthiness? The judge answered, You are not asking this out of love, since you have none, but my power compels you to ask it for the sake of this bride of mine who is listening. In the same way in which both the good and bad handled me in my human nature, in order to prove the reality of my human nature as well as my patient humility, so too good and wicked alike eat me at the altar. The good unto their greater perfection, the bad in order that they may not believe themselves to be already damned, and so that, having received my body, they might be converted, provided they decide to reform their intention. What greater love can I show them than that I, the most pure, will enter even the impurest of vessels, although, like the material sun, I cannot be defiled by anything? You and your comrades despise this love, for you have hardened yourselves against love. Then the mother spoke again. My good son, whenever he approached you, he was still reverent toward you, though not as he should have been. He also repents of having offended you, though not perfectly. My son, for my sake, consider this to his advantage. The son answered, As the prophet said, I am the true sun, although I am far better than the material sun. The material sun does not penetrate mountains or mines, but I can do both. A mountain can stand in the way of the material sun with the result that the sunlight does not reach the land nearby. But what can stand in my way except the sinfulness that prevents this soul from being affected by my love? Even if a part of the mountain were removed, the neighboring land would still not receive the warmth of the sun. And if I were to enter into one part of a pure mind, what consolation would it be to me if I could smell a stench from another part? Therefore, one should get rid of everything that is dirty, and then sweet enjoyment will follow upon beautiful cleanliness. His mother answered, May your will be done with all mercy. Explanation. This was a priest who had often received warnings regarding his incontinent behavior, and who did not want to listen to reason. One day, when he went out to the meadow to groom his horse, there came thunder and lightning that struck and killed him. His whole body was left unscathed, except for his private parts, which could be seen to be completely burned. Then the Spirit of God said, Daughter, those who get themselves entangled in such wretched pleasures deserve to suffer in their souls what this man suffered in his body. St. John Vianney's Sermons on the 7 Deadly Sins. On Pride. Pride is an untrue opinion of ourselves, an untrue idea of what we are not. The proud man is always disparaging himself, that people may praise him the more. The more the proud man lowers himself, the more he seeks to raise his miserable nothingness. He relates what he has done, and what he has not done. He feeds his imagination with what has been said in praise of him, and seeks by all possible means for more. He is never satisfied with praise. See, my children, if you only show some little displeasure against a man given up to self-love, he gets angry, and accuses you of ignorance or injustice towards him. My children, we are in reality only what we are in the eyes of God, and nothing more. Is it not quite clear and evident that we are nothing, that we can do nothing, that we are very miserable? Can we lose sight of our sins and cease to humble ourselves? If we were to consider well what we are, humility would be easy to us, and the demon of pride would no longer have any room in our heart. See, our days are like the grass which now flourishes in the meadows, and will presently be withered, like an ear of corn which is fresh only for a moment, and is parched by the sun. In fact, my children, today we are full of life, full of health, and tomorrow death will perhaps come to reap us and mow us down, as you reap your corn and mow your meadows. Whatever appears vigorous, whatever shines, whatever is beautiful, is of short duration. The glory of this world, youth, honors, riches, all pass away quickly as the flower of grass, as the flower of the field. Let us reflect that so we shall one day be reduced to dust, that we shall be thrown into the fire like dry grass, if we do not fear the good God. Good Christians know this very well, my children. Therefore they do not occupy themselves with their body. They despise the affairs of this world. They consider only their soul and how to unite it to God. Can we be proud in the face of the examples of lowliness, of humiliations that our Lord has given us and is still giving us every day? Jesus Christ came upon earth, became incarnate, was born poor, lived in poverty, died on a gibbet between two thieves. He instituted an admirable sacrament, in which he communicates himself to us under the Eucharistic veil, and in this sacrament he undergoes the most extraordinary humiliations. Residing continually in our tabernacles, he is deserted, misunderstood by ungrateful men, and yet he continues to love us, to serve us in the sacrament of the altar. O my children, what an example of humiliation does the good Jesus give us! Behold him on the cross to which our sins have fastened him. Behold him. He calls us and says to us, "Come to me and learn of me, because I am meek and humble of heart." How well the saints understood this invitation, my children! Therefore, they all sought humiliations and sufferings. After their example, then, let us not be afraid of being humbled and despised. Saint John of God, at the beginning of his conversion, counterfeited madness, ran about the streets, and was followed by the populace, who threw stones at him. He always came in covered with mud and with blood. He was shut up as a madman. The most violent remedies were employed to cure him of his pretended illness, and he bore it all in the spirit of penance, and in expiation of his past sins. The good God, my children, does not require of us extraordinary things. He wills that we should be gentle, humble, and modest. Then we shall always be pleasing to him. We shall be like little children, and he will grant us the grace to come to him and to enjoy the happiness of the saints. On Avarice. Avarice is an inordinate love of the goods of this world. Yes, my children, it is an ill-regulated love, a fatal love, which makes us forget the good God, prayer, the sacraments, that we may love the goods of this world, gold and silver and lands. The avaricious man is like a pig, which seeks its food in the mud, without caring where it comes from. Stooping towards the earth, he thinks of nothing but the earth. He no longer looks towards heaven. His happiness is no longer there. The avaricious man does no good till after his death. See, how greedily he gathers up wealth, how anxiously he keeps it, how afflicted he is if he loses it. In the midst of riches, he does not enjoy them. He is, as it were, plunged in a river, and is dying of thirst. Lying on a heap of corn, he is dying of hunger. He has everything, my children, and dares not touch anything. His gold is a sacred thing to him. He makes it his divinity. He adores it. O my children, how many there are in these days who are idolaters! How many there are who think more of making a good fortune than of serving the good God! They steal, they defraud, they go to law with their neighbor. They do not even respect the laws of God. They work on Sundays and holy days. Nothing comes amiss to their greedy and rapacious hands. Good Christians, my children, do not think of their body, which must end in corruption. They think only of their soul, which is immortal. While they are on the earth, they occupy themselves with their soul alone. So you see how assiduous they are at the offices of the church, with what fervor they pray before the good God, how they sanctify the Sunday, how recollected they are at Holy Mass, how happy they are. The days, the months, the years are nothing to them. They pass them in loving the good God, with their eyes fixed on their eternity. Seeing us so indifferent to our salvation, and so occupied in gathering up a little mud, would not anyone say that we were never to die? Indeed, my children, we are like people who, during the summer, should make an ample provision of gourds, of melons, for a long journey. After the winter, what would remain of it? Nothing. In the same way, my children, what remains to the avaricious man of all his wealth when death comes upon him unawares? A poor covering, a few planks, and the despair of not being able to carry his gold away with him. Misers generally die in this sort of despair, and pay eternally to the devil for their insatiable thirst for riches. Misers, my children, are sometimes punished even in this world. Once Saint Hilarion, followed by a great number of his disciples, going to visit the monasteries under his rule, came to the abode of an avaricious solitary. On their approach, they found watchers in all parts of the vineyard, who threw stones and clods of earth at them to prevent their touching the grapes. This miser was well punished, for he gathered that year much fewer grapes than usual, and his wine turned into vinegar. Another solitary, named Sabas, begged him, on the contrary, to come into his vineyard and eat the fruit. Saint Hilarion blessed it, and sent it to his religious, to the number of 3,000, who all satiated their hunger. And 20 days after, the vineyard yielded 300 measures of wine, instead of the usual quantity of 10. Let us follow the example of Sabas, and be disinterested. The good God will bless us, and after having blessed us in this world, he will also reward us in the other. Lust, the love of the pleasures that are contrary to purity. No sins, my children, ruin and destroy a soul so quickly as this shameful sin. It snatches us out of the hands of the good God, and hurls us like a stone into an abyss of mire and corruption. Once plunged in this mire, we cannot get out. We make a deeper hole in it every day. We sink lower and lower. Then we lose the faith. We laugh at the truths of religion. We no longer see heaven. We do not fear hell. O my children, how much are they to be pitied who give way to this passion! How wretched they are! Their soul, which was so beautiful, which attracted the eyes of the good God, over which he leaned as one leans over a perfumed rose, has become like a rotten carcass, of which the pestilential odor rises even to his throne. See, my children, Jesus Christ endured patiently among his apostles men who were proud, ambitious, greedy, even one who betrayed him. But he could not bear the least stain of impurity in any of them. It is of all vices that which he has most in abhorrence. My spirit does not dwell in you, the Lord says, if you are nothing but flesh and corruption. God gives up the impure to all the wicked inclinations of his heart. He lets him wallow, like the vile swine, in the mire, and does not even let him smell its offensive exhalations. The immodest man is odious to everyone, and is not aware of it. God has set the mark of ignominy on his forehead, and he is not ashamed. He has a face of brass, and a heart of bronze. It is in vain you talk to him of honor, of virtue. He is full of arrogance and pride. The eternal truths, death, judgment, paradise, hell, nothing terrifies him. Nothing can move him. So, my children, of all sins, that of impurity is the most difficult to eradicate. Other sins forge for us chains of iron, but this one makes them of bull's hide, which can be neither broken nor rent. It is a fire, a furnace, which consumes even to the most advanced old age. See those two infamous old men who attempted the purity of the chaste Susanna. They had kept the fire of their youth even till they were decrepit. When the body is worn out with debauchery, when they can no longer satisfy their passions, they supply the place of it, O sham, by infamous desires and memories. With one foot in the grave, they still speak the language of passion, till their last breath. They die as they have lived, impenitent. For what penance can be done by the impure? What sacrifice can be imposed on himself at his death? Who, during his life, has always given way to his passions? Can one, at the last moment, expect a good confession, a good communion, from him who has concealed one of these shameful sins, perhaps from his earliest youth, who has heaped sacrilege on sacrilege? Will the tongue, which has been silent up to this day, be unloosed at the last moment? No, no, my children. God has abandoned him. Many sheets of lead already weigh upon him. He will add another, and it will be the last. Envy. Envy is a sadness which we feel on account of the good that happens to our neighbor. Envy, my children, follows pride. Whoever is envious is proud. See, envy comes to us from hell. The devils, having sinned through pride, sinned also through envy, envying our glory, our happiness. Why do we envy the happiness and goods of others? Because we are proud. We should like to be the sole possessors of talents, riches, of the esteem and love of all the world. We hate our equals, because they are our equals. Our inferiors, from the fear that they may equal us. Our superiors, because they are above us. In the same way, my children, that the devil, after his fall, felt and still feels extreme anger at seeing us the heirs of the glory of the good God, so the envious man feels sadness at seeing the spiritual and temporal prosperity of his neighbor. We walk, my children, in the footsteps of the devil. Like him, we are vexed at good and rejoice at evil. If our neighbor loses anything, if his affairs go wrong, if he is humbled, if he is unfortunate, we are joyful, we triumph. The devil, too, is full of joy and triumph when we fall, when he can make us fall as low as himself. What does he gain by it? Nothing. Shall we be richer because our neighbor is poorer? Shall we be greater because he is less? Shall we be happier because he is more unhappy? O my children, how much we are to be pitied for being like this! Saint Cyprian said that the other evils had limits, but that envy had none. In fact, my children, the envious man invents all sorts of wickedness. He has recourse to evil speaking, to calumny, to cunning, in order to blacken his neighbor. He repeats what he knows, and what he does not know he invents. He exaggerates. Through the envy of the devil, death entered into the world, and also through envy we kill our neighbor. By dint of malice, of falsehood, we make him lose his reputation, his place. Good Christians, my children, do not do so. They envy no one. They love their neighbor. They rejoice at the good that happens to him, and they weep with him if any misfortune comes upon him. How happy should we be if we were good Christians! Ah, my children, let us then, Be good Christians, and we shall no more envy the good fortune of our neighbor. We shall never speak evil of him. We shall enjoy a sweet peace. Our soul will be calm. We shall find paradise on earth. Gluttony. Gluttony is an inordinate love of eating and drinking. We are gluttonous, my children. We take food in excess, more than is required for the support of our poor body, when we drink beyond what is necessary, so as even to lose our senses and our reason. Oh, how shameful is this vice! How it degrades us! See, it puts us below the brutes. The animals never drink more than to satisfy their thirst. They content themselves with eating enough. And we, when we have satisfied our appetite, when our body can bear no more, we still have recourse to all sorts of little delicacies. We take wine and liquors to repletion. Is it not pitiful? We can no longer keep upon our legs. We fall. We roll into the ditch and into the mud. We become the laughingstock of everyone, even the sport of little children. If death were to surprise us in this state, my children, we should not have time to recollect ourselves. We should fall in that state into the hands of the good God. What a misfortune, my children! How would our soul be surprised? How would it be astonished? We should shudder with horror at seeing the lost who are in hell. Do not let us be led by our appetite. We shall ruin our health. We shall lose our soul. See, my children, intemperance and debauchery are the support of doctors. That lets them live, and gives them a great deal of practice. We hear every day, such a one was drunk, and falling down he broke his leg. Another, passing a river on a plank, fell into the water and was drowned. Intemperance and drunkenness are the companions of the wicked rich man. A moment of pleasure in this world will cost us very dear in the other. There they will be tormented by a raging hunger and a devouring thirst. They will not even have a drop of water to refresh themselves. Their tongue and their body will be consumed by the flames for a whole eternity. Oh, my children, we do not think about it, and yet that will not fail to happen to some amongst us, perhaps even before the end of the year. St. Paul said that those who give themselves to excess in eating and drinking shall not possess the kingdom of God. Let us reflect on these words. Look at the saints. They pass their life in penance, and we would pass ours in the midst of enjoyments and pleasures. Saint Elizabeth, Queen of Portugal, fasted all Advent, and also from Saint John Baptist's day to the Assumption. Soon after, she began another Lent, which lasted till the feast of Saint Michael. She lived upon bread and water only, on Fridays and Saturdays, and on the vigils of the feasts of the Blessed Virgin, and on the Apostles. They say that Saint Bernard drank oil for wine. Saint Isidore never ate without shedding tears. If we were good Christians, we should do as the saints have done. We should gain a great deal for heaven at our meals. We should deprive ourselves of many little things which, without being hurtful to our body, would be very pleasing to the good God. But we choose rather to satisfy our taste than to please God. We drown, we stifle our soul in wine and food. My children, God will not say to us at the day of judgment, "Give me an account of thy body," but, "Give me an account of thy soul. What hast thou done with it?" What shall we answer him? Do we take as much care of our soul as of our body? O my children, let us no longer live for the pleasure of eating. Let us live as the saints have done. Let us mortify ourselves as they were mortified. The saints never indulged themselves in the pleasures of good cheer. Their pleasure was to feed on Jesus Christ. Let us follow their footsteps on this earth, and we shall gain the crown which they have in heaven. Anger. Anger is an emotion of the soul, which leads us violently to repel whatever hurts or displeases us. This emotion, my children, comes from the devil. It shows that we are in his hands, that he is the master of our heart, that he holds all the strings of it, and makes us dance as he pleases. See, a person who puts himself in a passion is like a puppet. He knows neither what he says nor what he does. The devil guides him entirely. He strikes right and left. His hair stands up like bristles of a hedgehog. His eyes start out of his head. He is a scorpion, a furious lion. Why do we, my children, put ourselves into such a state? Is it not pitiable? It is because we do not love the good God. Our heart is given up to the demon of pride, who is angry when he thinks himself despised, to the demon of avarice, who is irritated when he suffers any loss, to the demon of luxury, who is indignant when his pleasures are interfered with. How unhappy we are, my children, thus to be the sport of demons. They do whatever they please with us. They suggest to us evil speaking, calumny, hatred, vengeance. They even drive us so far as to put our neighbor to death. See, Cain killed his brother Abel out of jealousy. Saul wished to take away the life of David. Theodosius caused the massacre of the inhabitants of Thessalonica to revenge a personal affront. If we do not put our neighbor to death, we are angry with him, we curse him, we give him to the devil, we wish for his death, we wish for our own. In our fury, we blaspheme the holy name of God, we accuse his providence. What fury, what impiety, and what is still more deplorable, my children, we are carried to these excesses for a trifle, for a word, for the least injustice. Where is our faith? Where is our reason? We say in excuse that it is in anger that makes us swear, but one sin cannot excuse another sin. The good God equally condemns anger, and the excesses that are its consequences. How we sadden our guardian angel! He is always there at our side to send us good thoughts, and he sees us do nothing but evil. If we did like Saint Remigius, we should never be angry. See, the saint, being questioned by a father of the desert, how he managed to always be in an even temper, replied, I often consider that my guardian angel is always by my side, who assists me in all my needs, who tells me what I ought to do and what I ought to say, and who writes down, after each of my actions, the way in which I have done it. Philip II, King of Spain, having passed several hours of the night in writing a long letter to the Pope, gave it to his secretary to fold up and seal. He, being half asleep, made a mistake. When he meant to put sand on the letter, he took the ink bottle and covered all the paper with ink. While he was ashamed and inconsolable, the king said, quite calmly, No very great harm is done. There is another sheet of paper. And he took it, and employed the rest of the night in writing a second letter, without showing the least displeasure with his secretary. Sloth. Sloth is a kind of cowardice and disgust, which makes us neglect and omit our duties, rather than do violence to ourselves. Alas, my children, how many slothful people there are on this earth! How many are cowardly, how many are indolent in the service of the good God! We neglect, we omit our duties of piety, just as easily as we should take a glass of wine. We will not do violence to ourselves. We will not put ourselves to any inconvenience. Everything wearies, everything disgusts the slothful man. Prayer, the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which do so much good to pious souls, are a torture to him. He is weary and dissatisfied in church, at the foot of the altar, in the presence of the good God. At first he feels only dislike and indifference towards everything that is commanded by religion. Soon after, you can no longer speak to him either of confession or communion. He has no time to think of those things. O my children, how miserable we are in losing in this way the time that we might so usefully employ in gaining heaven, in preparing ourselves for eternity. How many moments are lost in doing nothing, or in doing wrong, in listening to the suggestions of the devil, in obeying him! Does not that make us terrible? If one of the lost had only a day or an hour to spend for his salvation, to what profit would he turn it? What haste he would make to save his soul, to reconcile himself with the good God! And we, my children, who have days and years to think of our salvation, to save our souls, we remain there with our arms crossed, like the man spoken of in the Gospel. We neglect, we lose our souls. When death shall come, what shall we have to present to our Lord? Ah, my children, hear how the good God threatens the idle. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit shall be cut down, and shall be cast into the fire. Take that unprofitable servant, and cast him out into the exterior darkness, where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Idleness is the mother of all vices. Look at the idle. They think of nothing but eating, drinking, and sleeping. They are no longer men, but stupid beasts. Giving up to all their passions, they drag themselves through the mire like swine. They are filthy, both within and without. They feed their soul only upon impure thoughts and desires. They never open their mouth, but to slander their neighbor, or to speak immodest words. Their eyes, their ears, are open only to criminal objects. O my children, that we may resist idleness, let us imitate the saints. Let us watch continually over ourselves. Like them, let us be very zealous in fulfilling all our duties. Let the devil never find us doing nothing, lest we should yield to temptation. Let us prepare ourselves for a good death, for eternity. Let us not lose our time in lukewarmness, in negligence, in our habitual infidelities. Death is advancing. Tomorrow we must, perhaps, quit our relations, our friends. Let us make haste to merit the reward promised in paradise to the faithful servant in the gospel. I am not like the others. Pride is the source and cause of all evil. Sermon by St. John Vianney. I am not like the others. That, my dear brethren, is the usual tone of false virtue, and the attitude of those proud people who, always quite satisfied with themselves, are at all times ready to censure and to criticize the conduct of others. That, too, is the attitude of the rich, who look upon the poor as if they were of a different race or nature from them, and who behave towards them accordingly. Let us go one better, my dear brethren, and admit that it is the attitude of most of the world. There are very few people, even in the lowliest conditions, who do not have a good opinion of themselves. They regard themselves as far superior to their equals, and their detestable pride urges them to believe that they are indeed worth a great deal more than most other people. From this I conclude that pride is the source of all the vices and the cause of all the evils which have occurred and which are still to come in the course of the centuries. We carry our blindness so far that often we even glorify ourselves on account of things which really ought to cover us with confusion. Some derive a great deal of pride because they believe that they have more intelligence than others. Others because they have a few more inches of land or some money, and in fact they should be in dread of the formidable account which God will demand of them one day. Oh, my dear brethren, if only some of them felt the need to say the prayer that St. Augustine addressed to God. My God, teach me to know myself for what I am, and I shall have no need of anything else to cover me with confusion and scorn for myself. We could say that sin is found everywhere, that it accompanies man in what he does and says. It is like a kind of seasoning or flavoring which can be tasted in every portion of a dish. Listen to me for a moment, and you can see this for yourselves. Our Lord gives us an example in the Gospel when he tells us of the Pharisee who went up into the temple to pray, and, standing up where all could see him, said in a loud voice, "O God, I give thee thanks that I am not as the rest of men steeped in sin. I spend my life doing good and pleasing you." Herein consists the very nature of the proud man. Instead of thanking God for condescending to make use of him for a good purpose and for giving him grace, he looks upon whatever good he does as something which comes from himself, not from God. Let us go into a few details, and you will see that there are hardly any exceptions to this general sin of pride. The old and the young, the rich and the poor, all suffer from it. Each and every one congratulates himself and flatters himself because of what he is or of what he has done. Or rather, of what he is not and what he does not. Everyone applauds himself and loves also to be applauded. Everyone rushes to solicit the praises of the rest of the world, and everyone strives to draw them to himself. In this way are the lives of the great majority of people passed. The door by which pride enters with the greatest ease and strength is the door of wealth. Just as soon as someone improves his possessions and his sources of wealth, you will observe him change his mode of life. He will act as Jesus Christ told us the Pharisees liked to act. These people love to be called master, and to have people saluting them. They like the first places. They begin to appear in better clothes. They leave behind their air of simplicity. If you salute them, they will, with difficulty, nod to you without raising their hats. Walking with their heads in the air, they will study to find the finest words for everything, though quite often they do not even know the meaning of the words, and they love to repeat them. In order to show that his wealth has been increased, this man will make your head swim with stories of the legacies he is going to receive. Others are preoccupied with their labors to become highly esteemed and praised. If one of them has succeeded in some undertaking, he will rush to make it known as widely as possible, so that his would-be wisdom and cleverness may be spread far and wide. If another has said something which has gained approval or interest, he will deafen everyone he knows with repetition of it, until they are bored to death and make fun of him. If such vain and boastful people do any traveling at all, you will hear them exaggerating 100 times all that they said and did to such an extent that you feel sorry for the people who have to listen to them. They think that they appear very brilliant, though people are scoffing at them in secret. No one can stop them from talking about themselves. One well-known braggart convinced himself that people believed everything he said. Observe a person of some standing scrutinizing the work of someone else. He will find 100 faults with it, and he will say, "Ah, what can you expect? He does not know any better." But since the proud person never depreciates the merit of someone else without increasing his own importance, he will hurry on then to speak of some work which he has done, which so-and-so has considered so well executed that he has talked about it to many others. Take a young woman who has a shapely figure, or who, at any rate, thinks she has. You see her walking along, picking her steps, full of affection, with a pride which seems colossal enough to reach the clouds. If she has plenty of clothes, she will leave her wardrobe open so that they can be seen. People take pride in their animals and in their households. They take pride in knowing how to go to confession properly, in saying their prayers, in behaving modestly and decorously in church. A mother takes pride from her children. You will hear a landowner whose fields are in better condition than those of his neighbors criticizing these and applauding his own superior knowledge. Or it may be a young man with a watch, or perhaps only the chain, and a couple of coins in his pocket, and you will hear him saying, "I did not know that it was so late," so that people will see him looking at the watch, or will know that he has one. You may observe a man gambling. He may have but 2 coins to spare, but he will have all he possesses in his hand, and sometimes even what is not his. Or, indeed, he will even pretend that he has more than he really has. How many people even borrow, either money or clothes, just to go to places of gambling or other kinds of pleasure? No, my dear brethren, there is nothing that is quite as ridiculous or stupid as to be forever talking about what we have or what we do. Just listen to the father of a family when his children are of age and get married. In all the places and gatherings where he is to be found, you will hear him saying, "I have so many 1,000 francs ready, my business will give me so many thousands," etc. But if later he is asked for a few coppers for the poor, he has nothing. If a tailor or a dressmaker has made a success of a coat or a frock, and someone seeing the wearer pass by says, "That looks very well. I wonder who made it," they will make very sure to observe, "Oh, I made that." Why? So that everyone may know how skillful they are? But if the garment had not been such a success, they would, of course, take good care to say nothing, for fear of being humiliated. The housewives in their own domain do similar things. And I will add this to what I have just said. This sin is even more to be feared in people who put on a good show of piety and religion. Your heart is but a mass of pride. You will tell me, perhaps, that you never judge people except by what you see or after you have actually heard or been the witness of some action. "I saw him doing this action, so I am sure. I heard what he said with my own ears. After that, I could not be mistaken." But I shall reply by telling you to begin by entering into your own heart, which is but a mass of pride, wherein everything is dried up. You will find yourself infinitely more guilty than the person whom you are so boldly judging, and you have plenty of room for fear, lest one day you will see him going to heaven while you are being dragged down to hell by the demons. Oh, unfortunate pride, says St. Augustine to us. You dare to judge your brother on the slightest appearance of evil. And how do you know that he has not repented of his fault, and that he is not numbered among God's friends? Take care that he does not take the place which your pride is putting you in great danger of losing. Yes, my dear brethren, all these rash judgments and all these interpretations come only from a person who has a secret pride, who does not know himself, and who dares to wish to know the interior life of his neighbor, something which is known to God alone. If only, my dear children, we were able to arrive at the stage of eradicating this first of the capital sins from our hearts, our neighbor would never do any wrong according to us. We should never amuse ourselves by examining his conduct. We should be content to do nothing else save weep for our own sins and work as hard as we could to correct them. Pride, and when your prayers are only an insult. There are some who derive satisfaction from the virtues they practice because their tendencies are all that way. For example, a mother will pride herself on the fact that she gives some alms, that she frequents the sacraments, that she even reads some spiritual books. Yet she sees without dismay that her children are keeping away from the sacraments. Her children do not make their Easter duty. Yet this mother, from time to time, gives them permission to go to amusements, to dances, to weddings, and sometimes to the winter gatherings. She loves to see her daughters appearing in public. She thinks that if they do not frequent these places of debauchery, no one will know them, and they will not be able to find themselves husbands and homes. Yes, undoubtedly they would be unknown, but only to the libertines. Yes, my dear brethren, they will not find themselves husbands from among those who would treat them like the most wretched slaves. This mother loves to see them well turned out. This mother loves to see them in the company of some young men who are wealthier than they are. After certain prayers and some good works, which certainly she will do, she thinks herself to be on the road to heaven. Carry on, my good mother. You are only a blind hypocrite. You have only the appearance of virtue. You set your mind at rest with the thought that you make some visits to the Blessed Sacrament. Without any doubt that is a good thing. But your daughter is at a dance. But your daughter is at the cabaret with libertines, and they will be spewing out nothing but one kind or another of indecency. But your daughter, tonight, is in a place where she should not be. Go away, blind and abandoned mother. Go out and leave your prayers. Do you not see that you are doing as the Jews did, who bent the knee before Jesus Christ to make a semblance of adoring him? So then, you come to adore God, while your children are out to crucify him. Poor blind creature, you do not know either what you say or what you do. Your prayers are only an insult which you offer to God. Begin by going to find your daughter, who is losing her soul. Then you may return to God to ask him for your conversion. A father thinks that it is quite enough to maintain good order in his house. He will not have anyone swearing or using obscene words. That is very good. But he has no scruple about allowing his boys to go to amusements, to fairs, and all sorts of pleasures like that. This same Father permits work to be done on Sundays on the slightest pretext, even such as not to go against the wishes of his reapers or his threshers. However, you see him in church adoring God, even prostrate before him. He is trying to avoid the slightest distraction. But tell me, my friends, how do you suppose God can look upon such people as that? Carry on, my poor friend, you are blind. Go and learn your duties, and then you may come to offer your prayers to God. Do you not see that you are doing the work of Pontius Pilate, who recognized Jesus Christ and who yet condemned him? You will see this other man, who is charitable, who gives alms, who is touched by the poverty of his neighbor. That is quite good. But he allows his children to live in the greatest ignorance. Perhaps they do not even know what they should do in order to be saved. Go along, my poor man. You are blind. Your alms and your sympathy are leading you with great steps straight to hell. Here is another who has plenty of good qualities. He likes to help everyone, but he cannot tolerate his unfortunate wife or his poor children, upon whom he heaps insults and possibly even ill-treats. Carry on, my friend. Your religion is worth nothing. This one thinks that he is quite good because he is not a blasphemer or a thief or even unchaste, but he goes to no trouble at all to correct those thoughts of hatred, of revenge, of envy, and of jealousy, which fill his soul almost every day. My friend, your religion can only ruin you. We see others, too, who are full of pious practices, who become full of scruples at omitting some prayers they usually say. They would think themselves lost if they were not at Holy Communion on certain days when they have the habit of receiving, but trifles make them impatient and grumblers. A mere word which they did not care for will fill them with coldness and dislike. They will have difficulty in being civil to their neighbor. They will want to have nothing to do with him. On different pretexts, they will avoid his company. They will find that someone has been behaving badly in respect of them. Go away, you poor hypocrites. Go and become converted. After that, you may have recourse to the sacraments, which, in your state, without knowing it, you are only profaning with your wrongly understood devotion. Pride is that accursed sin which drove the angels out of paradise and hurled them into hell. This sin began with the world. See, my children, we sin by pride in many ways. A person may be proud in his clothes, in his language, in his gestures, even in his manner of walking. Some persons, when they are in the streets, walk along proudly, and seem to say to people they meet, "Look how tall, how upright I am, how well I walk." Others, when they have done any good action, are never tired of talking about it, and if they fail in anything, they are miserable because they think people will have a bad opinion of them. Others are sorry to be seen with the poor. If they meet with anybody of consequence, they are always seeking the company of the rich. If by chance they are noticed by the great people of the world, they boast and are vain of it. Others take pride in speaking. If they go to see rich people, they consider what they are going to say. They study fine language, and if they make a mistake of a word, they are very much vexed, because they are afraid of being laughed at. But, my children, with a humble person it is not so. Whether he is laughed at or esteemed, or praised or blamed, whether he is honored or despised, whether people pay attention to him or pass him by, it is all the same to him. My children, there are again people who give great alms, that they may be well thought of. That will not do. These people will reap no fruit from their good works. On the contrary, their alms will turn into sins. We put pride into everything like salt. We like to see that our good works are known. If our virtues are seen, we are pleased. If our faults are perceived, we are sad. I remark that in a great many people, if one says anything to them, it disturbs them, it annoys them. The saints were not like that. They were vexed if their virtues were known, and pleased that their imperfections should be seen. A proud person thinks everything he does is well done. He wants to domineer over all those who have to do with him. He is always right. He always thinks his own opinion better than that of others. That will not do. A humble and well-taught person, if he is asked his opinion, gives it at once, and then lets others speak. Whether they are right or whether they are wrong, he says nothing more. When Saint Aloysius Gonzaga was a student, he never sought to excuse himself when he was reproached with anything. He said what he thought, and troubled himself no further about what others might think. If he was wrong, he was wrong. If he was right, he said to himself, "I have certainly been wrong some other time." My children, the saints were so completely dead to themselves that they cared very little whether others agreed with them. People in the world say, "Oh, the saints were simpletons." Yes, they were simpletons in worldly things, but in the things of God they were very wise. They understood nothing about worldly matters, to be sure, because they thought them of so little importance that they paid no attention to them. We are extraordinarily blind. We must certainly be extraordinarily blind, because when all is said and done, there is not a single person who could say that he is ready to appear before Jesus Christ. Yet, in spite of the fact that we are quite aware of this, there is still not one among us who will take a single step nearer to God. Dear Lord, how blind the sinner is! How pitiable is his lot! My dear children, let us not live like fools any longer, for at the moment when we least expect it, Jesus Christ will knock at our door. How happy then will the person be who has not been waiting until that very moment to prepare himself for him. That is what I wish you to be. Book 1, chapters 43 to 45, from Prophecies and Revelations by Saint Bridget of Sweden, narrated by Tony Capobianco. The words of the Son to his bride, about how people may rise up from a small good deed to the highest good, and fall down from a small evil to the greatest punishment and torment. Chapter 43. The Son of God said to his bride, "A great reward sometimes arises from a little good. The date palm has a wonderful smell, and in its fruit there is a stone. If it is planted in rich soil, it feels well, blossoms, and makes good fruit and grows into a great tree. But if it is planted in dry soil, it dries out. Very dry and empty of all goodness is the soil that delights in sin, and it does not become better even if the seed of virtues is sown in there. But rich is the soil of the mind that understands and confesses its sin and cries over their sin, which has provoked their Creator to anger. If the date stone, that is, if the thought of my severe judgment and power is sown in such a mind, it immediately strikes 3 roots in the mind. The first one is that he thinks about how he can do nothing without my help, and for this reason he opens his mouth in prayer to me. The second is that he begins to give some small alms to me for the sake of my honor. The third is that he separates himself from worldly affairs in order to better serve me. He then begins to restrain himself from superfluities through daily fasting, and abstains from and denies his own will and lust, and this is the trunk of the tree. After this, the branches of love grow when he leads and draws everyone he can toward the good. Then the fruit grows when he also instructs others in goodness as much as he can, and with all piety tries to find ways of increasing my honor. Such a fruit is the best one, and most pleasing to me. And so, from a small good, man rises up to perfection. When he first takes root through a little piety, the body grows through abstinence. The branches are multiplied through charity, and the fruit is increased through preaching. In the same way, a man falls down from a small evil to the greatest damnation and torment. Do you know what the heaviest burden is for the things that grow? Surely it is the child who was conceived but cannot be born and dies inside the womb of the mother. And because of this the mother also ruptures and dies, and the father carries her and the child to the grave and buries her with the rotting fetus. This is what the devil does to the soul. The iniquitous soul is indeed like the wife of the devil. She follows his will in everything, and she conceives a child with the devil when sin pleases her, and she rejoices in it. For just as a mother conceives a child and bears fruit through the little seed that is nothing but an unclean rottenness, so too the soul bears much fruit for the devil when she delights in sin. Thereafter the strength and limbs of the body get formed as sin gets added to sin and increases daily. When the sins increase, the mother swells up and wants to give birth, but cannot, since her nature is consumed in sin, and her life becomes detestable. She would gladly desire to sin even more, but she cannot, and it is not allowed by God. Then the fear arrives because she cannot fulfill her will, and her strength and joy are gone. Pain and sorrow are everywhere. While she is now despairing of being able to do any good thing or any good deed, her womb ruptures, and she dies while blaspheming and insulting God's judgment and punishment. Then she is dragged by her father, the devil, down to the grave of hell, where she is buried for all eternity with the rot of her sin and the child of her evil lust. Behold how sin increases from a small evil and grows unto damnation. The Creator's words to his bride about how he is now despised and reproached by men who pay no attention to what he did in love for them, when he admonished them through the prophets and suffered for their sake, and about how they do not care about the anger he exercised against the stubborn by punishing them severely. Chapter 44. I am the Creator and Lord of all things. I created the world, and the world despises me. I hear a voice from the world like that of a bumblebee who gathers honey on the earth. For when a bumblebee is flying and begins to land on the ground, it emits a very raspy voice. I now hear this raspy and ignorant voice in the world, saying, I do not care what comes after this. In truth, now everyone is shouting, I do not care of what comes after this, and may I have my own will. Indeed, mankind does not care about what I did for the sake of love, by preaching and suffering for them, and by admonishing them through the prophets. And they do not care about what I did in my anger, by executing my vengeance upon the evil and disobedient. They see that they are mortal, and that death can strike them unexpectedly, but they do not care. They hear and see my justice which I exercised on Pharaoh and on Sodom for the sake of sin, and how I execute vengeance on other kings and rulers, and how I daily allow it to happen through the sword and other afflictions. But it is as if they were blind to all these things. And for this reason they fly like bumblebees wherever they desire, and sometimes they fly as if they were jumping and running, for they exalt themselves in their pride, but they come down quickly by returning to their lust and gluttony. They also gather sweetness for themselves from the earth, for man works and gathers for the needs of the body, and not for the soul, and for the worldly honor, but not the eternal. They transform the temporal things into a suffering for themselves, and what is useless into eternal torment. But for the sake of the prayers of my mother, I will send my clear voice to these bumblebees, from which my friends are excluded, for they are in the world only in body, and it shall preach mercy. If they will listen to it, they will be saved. The answer of the Virgin Mother and the angels, the prophets, the apostles, and the devils to God, in the presence of the bride, testifying about his many virtues and his perfection in creation, incarnation, and redemption, and about how evil men nowadays contradict all these things, and about the severe judgment they receive. Chapter 45. The Mother of God said, Bride of my Son, clothe yourself and stand firm, for my Son is approaching you. His flesh was pressed as in a winepress. For since mankind sinned in all limbs, my Son made atonement in all his limbs. His hair was pulled out, his sinews extended, his joints were dislocated, his bones mangled, and his hands and feet were pierced through. His mind was saddened, his heart afflicted by sorrow. His intestines was forced in toward his back, for mankind had sinned in all limbs. Then the Son spoke, while the heavenly host was present, and he said, Although you know all things in me, still I speak for the sake of my bride standing here. I ask you, angels, what is it that was without beginning and shall be without end? And what is it that created everything and was created by none? Proclaim it and give your testimony. All the angels answered as with one voice and said, Lord, it is you. We give testimony to you about 3 things. First, that you are our Creator, and that you created all things in heaven and on earth. Second, that you are without beginning, and will be without end, and your kingdom and power will stand for all eternity. Without you nothing has been created, and without you nothing can be created. Third, we testify that we see all justice in you, and all the things that have been and will be, and all things are present to you, without beginning or end. Then he said to the prophets and patriarchs, I ask you, who brought you out of slavery into freedom? Who divided the waters for you? Who gave you the law? Who gave you the prophetic spirit to speak about future things? They answered him, saying, You, Lord. You brought us out of slavery. You gave us the law. You moved our spirit to speak and prophesy about future things. Then he said to his mother, Give true testimony about what you know of me. She answered, Before the angel whom you sent came to me, I was alone in soul and body. But after the angel's words, your body was within me with divinity and manhood, and I felt your body in my body. I bore you without pain and suffering. I gave birth to you without anguish and travail. I wrapped you in poor clothes, and I fed you with my milk. I was with you from your birth until your death. Thereafter he said to the apostles, Say who it was that you saw, heard, and touched." They answered, "We heard your words and wrote them down. We heard and saw the great works that you did when you gave us the new law. You commanded the demons with one word to leave humans, and they obeyed you and went out. And with your word you raised the dead and healed the sick. We saw you in a human body. We saw your great power and divine glory with your human nature. We saw you handed over to your enemies, and we saw you hanging on the cross. We saw you suffer the most bitter pain, and we saw you be laid in the grave. We touched you when you were raised from the dead. We touched your hair and your face. We touched the place of your wounds and your limbs. You ate with us, and you gave us your eloquence. You are truly the Son of God and the Son of the Virgin. We also observed when you ascended with your manhood to the right hand of the Father, where you now are and will be without end." Then God said to the unclean demon spirits, "Although you hide the truth in your conscience, still I now command you to say the truth about who it was that reduced your power." They answered him, "Just like thieves do not tell the truth unless their feet are pressed in the hard wood, so we do not speak the truth unless we are forced by your divine and formidable power. You are the one who, with your power, descended into hell. You reduced our power in the world. You took out from hell what was yours by right, namely, your friends." Then our Lord said, "Behold, all those who have a spirit and are not clothed in a body, bear witness to the truth for me. But those who have a spirit and body, namely humans, contradict me. Some know the truth of me, but do not care about it. Others do not know it, and therefore they do not care about it, but say it is all false." He again said to the angels, "They say that your witness is false, that I am not the creator of all things, and that all things are not known in me. Therefore they love the created things more than me, who am the creator." He said to the prophets, "They contradict you and say that the law is useless, that you can be saved through your own power and wisdom, that the Spirit was false, and that you spoke according to your own will." He said to his mother, "Some say that you are not a virgin, and others that I did not take a body from you. Others know it, but do not care about it." He said to the apostles, "They contradict you, for they say that you are liars, and that the new law is irrational and useless. Others believe it to be true, but do not care about it. I ask you now, who will be their judge?" They all answered him, saying, "You, God, who are without beginning and without end. You, Jesus Christ, who are with the Father, to you is all judgment given by the Father. You are their judge." Our Lord answered, "I who grieved for them am now their judge. But even though I know and can do all things, still give me your judgment over them." They answered him, "Just as the whole world perished once at the beginning of the world in Noah's flood, so too now the world deserves to perish by fire, since the wickedness and injustice are much greater now than what it was then." Then our Lord answered, "Since I am just and merciful, I shall make no judgment without mercy, nor mercy without justice. And therefore I will once more send my mercy to the world for the sake of the prayers of my mother and my saints. But if they do not want to listen, the most severe and harsh justice will follow and come to them." Book 2 of Prophecies and Revelations of Saint Bridget of Sweden. Jesus Christ speaks to the bride and compares his divine nature to a crown, and uses Peter and Paul to symbolize the clerical and the lay state, and about the ways of dealing with enemies. and about the qualities that knights in the world should have. Chapter 7. The son spoke to the bride, saying, I am the king of the crown. Do you know why I said king of the crown? Because my divine nature was and will be and is without beginning or end. My divine nature is aptly likened to a crown, because a crown has neither starting point nor end. Just as a crown is reserved for the future king in a kingdom, so too my divine nature was reserved for my human nature to be its crown. I had 2 servants. One was a priest, the other a layman. The first was Peter, who had a priestly office, while Paul was, as it were, a layman. Peter was bound in marriage, but when he saw that his marriage was not consistent with his priestly office, and considering that his upright intention might be endangered by a lack of continence, he separated himself from the otherwise licit marriage, in which he divorced himself from his wife's bed, and he devoted himself to me wholeheartedly. Paul, however, did observe celibacy and kept himself unstained by the marriage bed. See what great love I had for these 2. I gave the keys of heaven to Peter, so that whatever he bound or loosed on earth might be bound or loosed in heaven. I allowed Paul to become like Peter in glory and honor, as they were equals together on earth, so now they are united in everlasting glory in heaven, and glorified together. However, although I mentioned these 2 expressly by name, by and through them I mean to denote other friends of mine as well. In similar fashion, under the earlier covenant, I used to speak to Israel as if I were addressing just one person, although I meant to designate the entire people of Israel by that one name. In the same way now, using these 2 men, I mean to denote the multitude of those whom I have filled with my glory and love. With the passage of time, evils began to multiply, and the flesh began to grow weaker, and to be more than usually prone to evil. Therefore, I set up norms for each of the 2, that is, for the clergy and laity, represented here by Peter and Paul. In my mercy, I decided to allow the clergy to own a moderate amount of church property for their bodily needs, in order that they might grow more fervent and constant in serving me. I also allowed the laity to join in marriage according to the rites of the church. Among the priests there was a certain good man who thought to himself, The flesh drags me toward base pleasure, the world drags me towards harmful sights, while the devil sets various traps to get me to sin. Therefore, in order not to be ensnared by carnal pleasure, I will observe moderation in all my actions. I will be moderate in my rest and recreation. I will dedicate the proper time to work and prayer, and restrain my carnal appetites through fasting. Second, in order that the world may not drag me away from the love of God, I will give up all worldly things, for they are all perishable. It is safer to follow Christ in poverty. Third, in order not to be deceived by the devil, who is always showing us falsehoods instead of the truth, I will submit myself to the rule and obedience of another. And I will reject all selfishness, and show that I am ready to undertake whatever is commanded me by the other person. This man was the first to establish a monastic rule. He persevered in it in praiseworthy fashion, and left his life as an example to be imitated by others. For a time the class of the laity was well organized. Some of them tilled the soil, and bravely persevered in working the land. Others sailed on ships and carried merchandise to other regions, so that the resources of one region supplied the needs of another. Others were diligent craftsmen and artisans. Among these were the defenders of my church, who are now called knights. They took up arms as avengers of the Holy Church in order to do battle against her enemies. There appeared among them a good man and friend of mine, who thought to himself, I do not till the soil as a farmer. I do not toil on the seas as a merchant. I do not work with my hands as a skilled craftsman. What then can I do, or with what works can I please my God? I am not energetic enough in the service of the church. My body is too soft and weak to bear physical injuries. My hands lack the force to strike down enemies, and my mind grows uneasy in pondering the things of heaven. What can I do then? I know what I can do. I will go and bind myself to a stable oath to a secular prince, swearing to defend the faith of the Holy Church with my strength and with my blood. That friend of mine went to the prince and said, My lord, I am one of the defenders of the church. My body is all too weak to bear physical injuries. My hands lack the force to strike down others. My mind is unstable when it comes to thinking about and carrying out what is good. My self-will is what pleases me, and my need for rest does not let me take a strong stance for the house of God. I bind myself therefore with a public oath of obedience to the Holy Church and to you, O Prince, swearing to defend her all the days of my life, in order that, although my mind and will may be lukewarm with respect to the struggle, I can be held and compelled to toil because of my oath. The prince answered him, I will go with you to the house of the Lord, and be a witness to your oath and your promise. Both of them came up to my altar, and my friend genuflected and said, I am too weak of body to bear physical injuries. My self-will is all too pleasing to me. My hands are too lukewarm when it comes to striking blows. Therefore, I now pledge obedience to God and to you, my chief, binding myself by an oath to defend the Holy Church against her enemies, to comfort the friends of God, to do good to the widows, orphans, and God's faithful, and never to do anything contrary to God's church or the faith. Moreover, I will submit myself to your correction, if I should happen to err, in order that, bound by obedience, I might fear sin and selfishness all the more and apply myself more fervently and readily to carrying out God's will and your own will, knowing myself to be only the more worthy of condemnation and contempt if I should presume to violate obedience and transgress your commands. After this profession had been made at my altar, the prince wisely decided that the man should dress differently than other laymen, as a sign of his self-renouncement, and as a reminder to him that he had a superior to whom he had to submit. The prince also placed a sword in his hand, saying, This sword is for you to use to threaten and slay the enemies of God. He placed a shield on his arm, saying, Defend yourself with this shield against the missiles of the enemy, and patiently endure whatever is thrown against it. May you sooner see it shattered than run away from battle. In the presence of my priest, who was listening, my friend made the firm promise to observe all of this. When he had made his promise, the priest gave him my body to provide him strength and fortitude so that, once united with me through my body, my friend might never be separated from me. Such was my friend George, as well as many others. Such, too, should all the knights be. They should get to hold their title as a result of merit, and to wear their knightly attire as a result of their actions in defense of the holy faith. Hear how my enemies are now going against the earlier deeds of my friends. My friends used to enter the monastery out of their wise reverence and love for God, but those who are in monasteries nowadays go out into the world because of pride and greed, following self-will, fulfilling the pleasure of their bodies. Justice demands that people who die in such a disposition should not experience the joy of heaven, but rather obtain the endless punishment of hell. Know, too, that the cloistered monks who are forced against their will to become prelates out of love for God are not to be counted among their number. The knights who used to bear my arms were ready to lay down their lives for justice, and shed their blood for the sake of the holy faith, bringing justice to the needy, putting down and humbling the doers of evil. But hear how they now have been corrupted. Now they would rather die in battle for the sake of pride, greed, and envy at the promptings of the devil, instead of living after my commandments and obtaining eternal joy. Just wages will therefore be dealt out at the judgment to all the people who die in such a disposition, and their souls will be yoked to the devil forever. But the knights who serve me will receive their due wages in the heavenly host forever. I, Jesus Christ, true God and true man, one with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever, have said this. Christ's words to the bride about a certain knight's desertion from the true army, that is, from humility, obedience, patience, faith, etc., to the false one, that is, to the opposing vices, pride, etc., and the description of his condemnation, and about how one can meet with condemnation because of an evil will just as much as because of evil deeds. Chapter 8. I am the true Lord. There is no other Lord greater than I. There was no Lord before me, nor will there be any after me. All lordship comes from me and through me. This is why I am the true Lord, and why no one but I alone can truly be called Lord, for all power comes from me. I was telling you earlier that I had 2 servants, one of whom manfully took up a praiseworthy way of life and kept it manfully to the end. Countless others followed him in that same way of knightly service. I will now tell you about the first man to desert the profession of knighthood as instituted by my friend. I will not tell you his name, because you do not know him by name, but I will disclose his purpose and desire. A man who wanted to become a knight came to my sanctuary. When he went in, he heard a voice. 3 things are necessary if you want to be a knight. First, you must believe that the bread you see on the altar is true God and true man, the Creator of heaven and earth. Second, once you take up your knightly service, you must exercise more self-restraint than you were accustomed to doing before. Third, you should not care about worldly honor. Rather, I will give you divine joy and everlasting honor. Hearing this and pondering these 3 things to himself, he heard an evil voice in his mind making 3 proposals contrary to the first 3. It said, "If you serve me, I will make you 3 other proposals. I will let you take what you see, hear what you like, and obtain what you desire." When he heard this, he thought to himself, "The first Lord bade me to have faith in something I do not see, and promised me things unknown to me. He bade me abstain from the delights that I can see, and that I desire, and to hope for things which I am uncertain. The other Lord promised me the worldly honor that I can see, and the pleasure that I desire, without forbidding me to hear or see the things I like. Surely it is better for me to follow him, and to have what I see, and to enjoy the things that are sure, rather than to hope for things of which I am uncertain." With thoughts such as these, this man was the first to commence the destruction from the service of a true knight. He rejected the true profession, and broke his promise. He threw down the shield of patience at my feet, and let the sword for the defense of the faith drop from his hands, and left the sanctuary. The evil voice told him, "If, as I said, you would be mine, then you should walk proudly in the fields and streets. That other Lord commands his men to be constantly humble. Therefore, be sure not to avoid any sign of pride and ostentation. While that other Lord made his entrance in obedience, and subjected himself to obedience in every way, you should let no one be your superior. Bend not your neck in humility to another. Take up your sword to shed the blood of your neighbor and brother in order to acquire his property. Strap the shield to your arm and risk your life for the sake of winning renown. Instead of the faith that he holds out, give your love to the temple of your own body, without abstaining from any of the pleasures that you delight. While the man was making up his mind and strengthening his resolve with such thoughts, his prince laid his hand on the man's neck in the appointed place. No place whatsoever can harm anyone who has a good will, or help anyone whose intention is wicked. After the confirmation of his knighthood, the wretch betrayed his knightly service, exercising it only with a view to worldly pride, making light of the fact that he was now under a greater obligation to live an austere life than before. Countless armies of knights imitated and still imitate this knight in his pride, and he has sunk all the deeper into the abyss due to his knightly vows. But given that there are many people who want to rise in the world and achieve renown, but do not manage to do so, you might ask, are these people to be punished for the wickedness of their intentions as much as those who achieve their desired success? To this I answer you. I assure you that anyone who fully intends to rise in the world and does all he can to do so, in order to gain an empty title of worldly honor, although his intention never achieves its effect due to some secret decision of mine, such a man will be punished for the wickedness of his intention, just as much as the one who does manage to achieve it, that is, unless he rectifies his intention through penance. Look, I will put to you the example of two persons known well enough to many people. One of them prospered according to his wishes and obtained almost everything he desired. The other had the same intention, but not the same possibilities. The first one obtained worldly renown. He loved the temple of his body in its every lust. He had the power he wanted. Everything he put his hand to prospered. The other was identical to him in intention, but received less renown. He would willingly have shed his neighbor's blood 100 times over in order to be able to realize his plans of greed. He did what he could and carried out his will in accordance with his desire. These two were alike in their horrible punishment. Although they did not die at exactly the same time, I can still speak of one soul rather than two, since their condemnation was one and the same. Both had the same thing to say when body and soul were separated and the soul departed. Once having left the body, the soul said to it, "Tell me, where now are the sights to delight my eyes that you promised me? Where is the pleasure you showed me? Where are the pleasant words that you bade me use?" The devil was there and answered, "The promised sights are no more than dust. The words are but air. The pleasure is but mud and rot. Those things are of no value to you now." The soul exclaimed then, "Alas, alas, I have been wretchedly deceived. I see three things. I see him who was promised to me under the semblance of bread. He is the very King of kings and Lord of lords. I see what he promised, and it is indescribable and inconceivable. I hear now that the abstinence he recommended was really most useful." Then, in an even louder voice, the soul cried out, "Woe!" 3 times. "Woe is me that ever I was born! Woe is me that my life on earth was so long! Woe is me that I shall live in a perpetual and never-ending death! Behold what wretchedness the wretched will have in return for their contempt of God and their fleeting joy. You should therefore thank me, my bride, for having called you away from such wretchedness. Be obedient to my spirit and to my chosen ones." Welcome to the Virgo Potens YouTube channel. If you enjoy this video, give it a like. I also invite you to subscribe to this channel so that you won't miss new content. Please prayerfully consider supporting my work by becoming a patron of Virgo Potens on Patreon and/or by buying one of my books. My ebooks are available on Amazon as well as on the Apple Bookstore. For those who prefer a physical copy rather than an ebook, my book, Spiritual Warfare, Know Thy Enemy, is also available as a paperback on Amazon. If you are interested in making a one-time contribution, I suggest that you do so by simply buying one of my books. I am thankful for your support. Links to Patreon and to my books will be posted in the comments section of this video. The continuation of this work isn't possible without you. Lastly, and most importantly, please pray for me. May the Virgin Most Powerful guide and protect you.